Hello ladies and gentlemen, in this brief introductory lesson we'll learn the basic concepts related to phonetics and phonology. Let's begin by reflecting about the nature of language and the importance of sounds and pronunciation in our life. Now, if I ask you how long you spend speaking to other people, like what percentage of your time you spend talking to other people, or listening, or reading, or writing, you will see that most of your time and a great part of your life you will be listening to other people, and a great deal of this time you will also spend speaking to other people. But then reading and writing, even though they are important, they are not as extensive and as common and as necessary as listening and speaking. It is obvious then that listening and speaking are the most important skills that human beings use throughout their lives and the ones that allows us to socialize and interact with other people. Now, if we see the place of sounds and pronunciation in the general construct of communicative competence, we will see that in order to be able to speak a language, that means to have proficiency or communicative competence, there are many skills involved. There is linguistic competence, pragmatic competence, and strategic competence. And each of these are divided into different other competences. We will see that linguistic competence, for example, involves phonological competence. That means fluency and accuracy in the language. We can see in this model here that being able to produce and to understand the sounds of the language is a very important part of knowing and speaking a language. But most important of all, we must say that at one level, language is nothing but air that is modulated in a certain way to produce sounds to which we attribute meaning. In other words, when I speak English right now, the only thing that I'm doing is that I'm expelling the air from my lungs out of my nose and my mouth, and I'm modulating this air with the help of my tongue, my lips, and all of the organs of speech. And I am producing sounds, but these sounds have meaning to you. You are understanding what I'm saying. And by means of this air that I'm changing to produce sounds, I can express my ideas, my opinion, my feelings, and we can establish communication. That is a great miracle. De la misma manera, si comienzo a hablar ahora en español, el fenómeno es exactamente el mismo. Estoy expulsando el aire que viene de mis pulmones a través de mi nariz, de mi boca, y estoy utilizando mis órganos del aparato fonador para producir sonidos, pero estos son sonidos que tienen significado para ustedes. Ustedes entienden lo que estoy diciendo y a través de estos sonidos que estoy produciendo, simplemente modulando el aire, puedo expresar mis ideas, opiniones y puedo establecer comunicación con otras personas. Y esto es realmente sorprendente. De la même façon, si je parle en français, je peux vous dire que c'est exactement la même chose. J'ai produit des sons, maintenant c'est les sons de la langue française, mais la seule chose que j'ai fait, c'est de moduler l'air de mes poumons et je les change à travers ma bouche, ma langue, mes lèvres. Et j'ai produit des sons, mais ces sons, c'est pas n'importe quel type de son. C'est des sons qui vont m'aider à exprimer mes idées, mes opinions et à établir la communication avec d'autres personnes, avec d'autres êtres humains. Et ça, c'est vraiment un miracle. In conclusion then, to speak a language we need phonological competence, that is, the knowledge of the sound system. And for some reason, we can understand that different kinds of sounds and different combinations of sounds can belong to different languages. For example, look at these words. These words do not exist. I invented them. But if they existed, by listening to them, you could tell me if they belong to English, to French, or to Spanish. Let's listen to them and see to which language they could belong. The first word, plink, 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 has obviously some kind of sounds and combinations of sounds that could only belong to English, but do not exist in Spanish or French. In the same way, the word noiseau, noiseau, noiseau could only belong to the French language because we don't have sounds like that or combinations of sounds like that in Spanish or in English. Camaro could obviously be a Spanish word because of the kind of sounds and the kind of syllables. And of course, aigneux will be French, poseta will be Spanish, and staffel will obviously be an English word. So, we can say that phonological competence involves knowing what sounds are in the language and what sounds are not in the language. And secondly, that phonological competence also involves knowing how sounds pattern together in a language. In other words, what combinations of sounds are possible or not possible in a particular language. One of the greatest challenges for learners of English is the complexity of its phonological system. In other words, there is not a clear correspondence between spelling and pronunciation. For example, different letters may represent the same sound, as in to, through, clue, shoe, sew, through. Even though they have different spellings, all of them have the same vowel sound, oo. A second difficulty is that the same letter may represent different sounds. For example, the letter a has a very different pronunciation in all of these words. Cake, mat, call, any, sofa. In the same way, the letter S has a different pronunciation in these three words. See, pleasure, pleasure, resign, resign. And there are even more problems. For example, combinations of more than one letter may represent just one single sound, as in rough, physics, head, and character. We can see that even though there are two letters underlined, these two letters represent just one sound. And finally, we can see that in English, some letters may represent no sound at all. All of the letters that you see here, which are underlined, are not pronounced in all of the words. Bomb, bomb, cake, cake, pneumonia, pneumonia, psychology, psychology, knee, knee, through, through, debt, debt, receipt, receipt, answer, answer, walk, walk, right, right. We can see then that because the phonological system of English is very complex, and because there is not a clear correspondence between spelling and pronunciation, it is very important to find the regular patterns of the English language so that we can improve our pronunciation. In fact, the relationship between spelling and pronunciation in English are so complex that there are 14 ways to spell the sound sh. For example, shoe, we have an S and an H. Sugar, there is just an S. Issue, we have a double S. Mention, we have an S plus an I. Mission, in this case we have a double S. And what about nation? We have a T and an I. And in suspicion, we have a C and an I. In ocean, we have a C before an E. And then in nauseous, we have an S and an E. Conscious involves an S, a C, and an I. And in chaperone, we have a C and an H. In the word schist, we have an S, a C, and an H. And in the word fuchsia, we have a C, an S, an H, and an I. And finally, in this interjection show, we have a P, an S, and an H. So we can see here that there are 14 different ways to spell the same sound. This is one of the most striking examples to demonstrate the complexity of the English language phonological system. Let us now introduce the basic concepts in phonetics and phonology. First of all, phonetics can be defined as the study of human sounds in general, without reference to their systemic role in a specific language. That means that phonetics is going to study everything about how human sounds are produced, how they are transmitted, and how they are perceived. For this reason, it is divided into 3 types. First of all, we have articulatory phonetics, which studies the production of sounds. Secondly, we have acoustic phonetics, which refers to the study of the transmission of sounds. And finally, auditory phonetics will study the perception of sounds. Now, concerning phonology, this term refers to the functional classification of the sounds of a particular language. This means that phonology is the system of sounds by means of which meanings can be differentiated in a language and which serve as the building blocks for the higher linguistic levels. So we can see here that the difference between phonetics and phonology is that phonology is going to study how sounds exist and are produced in a particular language, how they are classified, and how these sounds are combined in order to create higher levels of meaning. Let us now turn to the basic unit of phonetic study. This is the phoneme. It can be defined as the smallest unit of language that distinguishes meaning and, as such, the organizational unit of phonology. It is very important to mention that phonemes are not the same as letters. Phonemes are graphic representations of sounds. For this reason, to represent phonemes, we use slashes. For example, we have the phoneme T. Let's illustrate this with a couple of examples. We can say that and U are 2 different phonemes in English because they can change the meaning of words. For example, when you pronounce full, as in the first example, the meaning is of something that is not empty. When you pronounce fool, the meaning is a person that is not very smart. The same happens with po, po, and pool, pool. You can see that in this case, if you pronounce one sound instead of the other, you change the meaning of the word. That is why we say that these are two different phonemes in English. Here is another example. I and J. These, again, are two distinctive sounds in English. For example, if you pronounce yolk, we are talking about the yellow part of an egg. And if you say joke, we are talking about a funny story. In the same way, if we say you, we're talking about the second person singular, and if we say you, we're talking about a person with a particular ethnic origin. So that is why we say that phonemes are sounds with meaning, because if we pronounce one sound instead of the other, there is a change of meaning. Now let's talk about allophones. An allophone is a non-distinctive variant of a phoneme. In other words, this sound is pronounced in a different way, but native speakers understand it as being exactly the same sound. For example, it doesn't matter how you pronounce the t in the word letter, such as letter or letter, the meaning of the word is not changed because we perceive it as being exactly the same sound. It's just perceived as a different in accent. And phoneme t, for example, can be pronounced in many different ways, but it is perceived as being the same sound. Just compare how the sound t sounds in these words. First of all, teacher, teacher, and then mountain, mountain, and then 20, 20, and then bottle, bottle. You can see that in all of these words, the sound t has different characteristics. It is articulated in a different way, and it sounds differently, but it is perceived as being exactly the same sound. So all of these are told to be the allophones of the sound t. Now, in the same way that we have an alphabet to represent all of the letters of a sound, we also have phonetic alphabets that contain the symbols that represent all of the phonemes and allophones of a particular language. And the most extensively used phonetic alphabet, of course, is the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. However, in this course, we're going to be using the American model, which seems to be a little bit more adapted for our purposes. But all through the course, I'm going to be teaching you the different correspondences that exist between this American model and the International Phonetic Alphabet or other alphabets, so that you can identify what as symbols represent the same phoneme in different kinds of alphabets. So, that was a brief introduction to the basic concepts in phonetics and phonology. Thanks for your attention, and now turn to your activity in Google Classroom.